Today I'm talking about Vita Nostra, dark academia fantasy you probably haven't heard of. A little context first. So I walked into Waterstones, the usual, and I saw it sitting on the dark academia shelf, and the little plaque that they hang up next to it said, "The Russian dark academia fantasy you need to read." Well, so turns out that statement was only 2/3 correct. I did need to read it. Obviously, I saw it as a just for you type of thing, but it's not quite dark academia, nor is it a fantasy. It's also a psychological book that explores language and philosophical ideas. It blends the elements of young adult fiction with the petty drama and the sort of teenage angst into the universal, making it an interesting experience for, well, anyone, no matter the age. My aim today with this video is to provide a brief overview of the book and just help you decide whether you think it's worth the read or not. Vita Nostra was written in Russian by the Ukrainian authors Marina and Sergei Dysenko all the way back in 2007. I know, it seems like a whole different world. It was only translated into English recently. I mean, according to Goodreads, the second book in the series, the final installment, only came out March of this year, 3 months ago. That's the first issue I want to talk about and hope that you take into consideration: the translation. How can I put this politely without offending the international base of fans that the book has amassed? The book that you read is not the book that I read. I had the privilege of reading the book in the original Russian. Fortunately, I could. I glanced at the English translation and I don't want to be dramatic, but I'm going to be. It made me almost physically sick. Look, I know you don't want to hear the usual gab. The translation is always worse than the original. The clarity is lost, the nuance is lost, blah blah blah. Yes, but this universal truth is amplified almost to the extreme in this case. Look, I could probably forget the writing quality being lost, albeit it was literally unreadable. It read like something a pretentious teen would write. And I can probably comment on that. The fact that it lost so many of the nuances and puzzles when I don't think it needed to, really. Let's talk about the name. So the main character's name is Alexandra Samokhina. The thing is, Sasha is a nickname of Alexandra, right? But in the original Russian, they don't use Sasha, they use Sashka, which is a diminutive of the nickname. Let's unpack a little why that's important. So, for a start, by making a diminutive of what's already a nickname, it makes her younger, it changes her personality, it literally alters what we think of her when we first encounter her. Because there's a difference between saying Sasha, oh, maybe she's just a casual girl who doesn't like her full name, and saying Sashka. Sashka can only be a fun 16-year-old who's still not quite independent and who's overly attached to her parents and very, very infantile in many regards. In a lot of the cases in the book, when they address Sashka, nobody says Sashka except for the narrator. And some people say Sasha, and some people say Alexandra. I mean, it really, really changes the relationships that she has, but this is not reflected in the English translation. And I don't quite understand why, because if you're going to use Sasha and say that it's a nickname, you might as well use Sashka as well and explain that it's a further diminutive of the nickname. In a book that doesn't revolve around the power of language, in a book that's not so meta and so layered and so complex and so intriguing, sure, it doesn't matter, I'm being picky. But here, it really is just one of the nails on the coffin. Why not just add the extra K into the name Sashka? Does it really cost that much more to print? Does it really cost that much more to type when you're translating it? The narrator calls her Sashka, and part of the intrigue is we don't quite know who the narrator is. We might think that it's some all-knowing, omniscient being, or we might think it's Sashka herself. And it's the fact that she still calls herself Sashka, even after she has experienced all of this, if it is her, that shows how she's retaining her humanity. It adds a whole different layer of ambiguity. And I know it's not a big thing, and I know it could be a special choice on the translator's part, but it just didn't add anything to my positive thoughts on the translation overall. And I realize I haven't even told you the plot yet, but this needed to be said, and I have prepared my phone to read an excerpt from the English translation for you so you understand what I'm talking about. Sasha felt as if someone had hit her on the head. Was he crazy? Were they both crazy? What if I won't do it? Why would I? The black lenses hung in front of her like two black holes leading nowhere. You will, Sasha, you will, because the world around you is very fragile. Every day people fall down, break their bones, die under the wheels of a car, drown, get hepatitis or tuberculosis. I really don't want to tell you all this, but it is in your best interest to simply do everything I ask of you. It's not complicated. Near the balustrade, Mom was laughing. She turned, waved, and said something to her companion. They may have been talking about her, about Sasha. Are you a pervert? Asked Sasha hopefully. A pervert she could understand. The black glasses tilted. No, let's just settle this right away before we incapacitate ourselves here. You're healthy, and I'm not a pervert. You have a choice. Dangle forever between a scary dream and a real nightmare, or you can pull yourself together, calmly perform the task that is asked of you, and continue living normally. You can say, this is a dream. It's giving Wattpad. In another world, Sasha, not even Sashka, I'm sorry, is YN, and the guy she's talking to, Farid, is Harry Styles, who's come to kidnap her. This is not even the worst extract, honestly, but the writing just feels so incredibly unnatural and forced at times, like, I'm not a pervert. I think it may be because of the use of the words ludicrous, like ludicrous in some parts of the book, that makes it feel unnatural as well, because if Sasha really is presented as just this carefree young teenage girl who literally thinks of nothing but just having fun at the beach and, I don't know, buying cherries, because cherries in Russia are quite cheap, then I don't understand why she's using words like ludicrous if the narrator is her. And I mean, Mom was standing at the balustrade. If it really was a third party, I think they would say her mother was standing at the balustrade or something along those lines. So it's giving that the narrator is actually her, but in the future. It also feels like Google Translator did some of the work, because the words, like the sentence structure, like it's not wrong, but it's just really off. You'll be reading a sentence and there'll just be a random connective in the middle of it, like though or however or nevertheless. And again, that's completely fine, that's grammatically correct, but it really breaks the flow when she's thinking of like teenage thoughts to have her use an elaborate connective. Okay, but whatever, back to the excerpt. So the scary man she's talking to is asking her to do his bidding. So the plot is something like this. Sashka, is 16, she's at the beach, she's having the time of her life with her mother. Her mother is not very wealthy. Sasha, like they don't have a lot of money. Sasha's father disappeared into the distance, but they're having the time of their lives at this well-deserved holiday. Then, while she's swimming and having fun, suddenly she notices this strange man who's wearing black sunglasses and he's dressed completely in black. Ooh, how scary, how unpredictable. I mean, very cliche meeting. So she looks at him and she goes, yikes, especially because she makes eye contact with him and she isn't very happy because she gets shivers all over herself and she thinks, okay, I'm just gonna avoid this guy, he's a creep, he's a weirdo. After a few days, she forgets about the guy, and then her mother sends her to buy cherries. She goes to the market, she sees that guy, she realizes he's following her. She runs away. Okay, that's fine. She ran away, everything ended okay, she's like, whatever, just avoid the guy. Next day, she goes out with her mom, he's literally right there, staring at her. And he's looking in the other direction, but she knows he's staring at her. So she's like, okay, whatever, I'm just going to tell my mother. And like expected in these kinds of fantasy novels, it just does not work out. Her mom comes up to him, yeah, because that was a good idea, and she tells him, why are you staring at my daughter? And basically he tells her that he's from Nizhny Vartovsk, which by the way is where my mother's family is from. And then he says, I'm allergic to the sun, which is why I'm all in black. She comes back, she's embarrassed, she's like, Sasha, stop embarrassing me in front of strange men, like just let him do his own thing, stop letting it ruin our holiday. So they forget about it. But the next day, right, again he chases Sasha and she realizes that she's stuck in a time loop and she has to talk to him or she's just going to repeat the day over and over again. So when she finally ends up talking to the guy, Farid, his name is, he tells her that her task is to wake up at 4 a.m. and swim to the buoys, you know, those floaty things on the ocean, and she has to do this at 4 a.m. naked. And she thinks, okay, cool, he's just a creep, whatever. So she ends up doing it because he tells her if she doesn't, something bad is gonna happen, and she believes him. So she keeps on swimming, she keeps on swimming. One day her alarm doesn't ring, and her mother's summer fling has a stroke. So she realizes, okay, I need to trust this guy. And every time she swims and comes back, she vomits up these like strange coins, and he tells her to keep them very carefully. Then the holiday ends, he leaves her alone, she comes back to the city, she lives her normal life. But then he comes back. I mean, pretty expected, right? I don't know why she just expected him to forget her. I don't think that was in anyone's plans if he was really harassing her in the summer to swim and to do physical activity, all for these random coins. So he tells her that this time she needs to wake up at 5 a.m. and go running. So she does that, she does that. By this point she's 17, it's almost time to go to university. And just when she's about to go to university, he presents her with a piece of paper and it says, you are invited to the Institute of Special Technologies in Torpa, which is basically a city in the middle of nowhere. I can't even call it a city, it's sort of like a village. At this university, what they're given to do is they're given these random tasks, these textbooks full of gibberish, and they have to memorize passages. No one tells them why they're doing this, no one tells them what they're going to do with their lives. All these poor kids know is that if they leave the university or if they don't study hard, one of their family members is going to die or something bad is going to happen. Not to them, but to something that they love or someone. So throughout the entire novel, puppies die, grandmas fall, fingers break, bad things happen, and Sasha is committed to her studies now that she realizes the extent of her problem, what happens if she doesn't study, and she soon becomes the best student in her year. And the majority of the book is literally just her studying this gibberish and being like, I don't understand, this is too hard, and Farid being like, you have to study or your mom's going to die. And then by the end, we start to slowly figure out why she's there, but nobody tells us anything, and Sasha does as well. So the majority of this book, you're confused, perplexed, bemused, bamboozled. I mean, Vita Nostra is truly an academic book because the whole point is literally just seeing her study and try to survive. There's a lot of commentary here on motivation and what drives people, and just the arguments of the carrot or the stick in education. What makes someone study? What kind of motivation is stronger than fear, or stronger than anger, or stronger than love? So the majority of the book is just her trying not to die of intellectual exhaustion. Oh, and her love issues because she's too scared of losing her virginity, and she has all these boy troubles and all the sort of usual teenage things. The interesting part comes towards the last 100 pages and continues into the next book, but I'm not sure how many of you would be willing to get to that stage if it means plowing through like 300 pages of a bad translation of her doing essentially nothing but reading this textbook and thinking, oh my god, my brain hurts. Oh, and to add to the whole feeling of what's going on, the book is set in like the sort of post-Soviet times where mobile coverage is very low, and she rarely talks to her mom and her new boyfriend, the guy from the summer fling who, spoiler, survived. And then there's the older years who you would expect to somehow help them, but all the older years tell the younger people, like Sashka, is just study hard, and they're all freaks and they stare into space and they all have like one eye or like no hands and they're cold all the time. So it's clear that they're not normal, something's clearly wrong with their psyche, and the whole thing is just an inescapable red flag. So if it is that confusing plot-wise and it's not very engaging, you might ask, why did you keep reading Polina? Well, I think it's the relatable quality of it all. No, luckily I don't have a fully clothed pervert chasing me and telling me to swim out to the boys. I mean, I don't even have an ocean here. But it's the universal sort of sense of the importance of tea in the Russian culture, the feeling of being on summer vacation, those lazy moments before you go into the autumn, go into the whole like autumn seasonal depression, season of exams. It's the snow spiraling around you as you study. It's that stretch of time before you get to New Year. It's something very specific to the mentality of the post-Soviet Union countries. And I'm not sure how much of this would pass on to the West, because for me it was just like nostalgia for a time I never quite knew, I only knew parts of, but I grew up hearing the stories of people who did know this time, who lived through it, who told me stories of their youth and of their education and of their childhood. And when you grow up in this sort of atmosphere surrounded by what's going on in the book, it gives you this feeling of, I don't want to say nostalgia, but relatability. And I think that even if this doesn't pass on in the West, what would pass on is those universal feelings of first love, of worry about leaving your parents and going off to become independent, being scared and being terrified of failure but still plowing on. The complexities of relationships, the small and big rebellions of talking back to the teacher, to academic misdemeanors. You get to relive a very special part of the human experience, and I think that's always a gift and always a pleasure, because in fantasy novels that are, I don't know, completely like in a whole different world, you're in a whole different world, and that has its own pleasures, of course, but you don't get to have this sense of nostalgia and experience life again through the eyes of someone different. The other things that keep you going, that make this book worthwhile in reading, are the themes of love. Love, the power of love. Sasha is a person who wants to abandon fear, who wants to just love, who wants to create a world where fear isn't the main player, where fear isn't the main driver. She wants to make a better world, and I mean, who doesn't? Who doesn't want to join her on her journey? Because it's just such an uplifting story to see her have this goal to create a whole new world and to chase that possibility, to do everything that she can towards it, to just live hoping and waiting for the moment when she can forge her own future, and she can. And of course there are moments when she comes close to breaking. We see people around her fall apart constantly, suffer from nervous breakdowns, have family members die because they got a 4 rather than a 5, but still they persevere. This is a book that talks about endurance and the human will, and not only emotional intelligence but actual intelligence. There's so much that Sasha or Sashka has to learn in terms of waking up and realizing what sport can do to her body, and the power of habits and the power of discipline. I mean, it's more than any self-help book can teach you. And I could honestly write an entire essay on the parallels between this and hyper-competitive institutions in our world. Who at top schools and top universities nowadays doesn't think, if I fail, a part of my loved ones is going to die? They might not die physically like in the book, but their expectations, their hopes would collapse as well. The true masterpiece comes at the end of the novel, when we realize that all along the authors have been leaving us clues about what the university is, what the university does. At some point Sasha says, the book is like a text, the world is like a text, and we realize that the boundaries between us and the characters blur, and the characters seem to become so much more sentient, so much more real, and we become so much more involved in the story. And the philosophical ideas like materialism and immaterialism and sort of Plato's ideas and the whole idea of language as a building factor, as something that shapes creation, it all starts to make sense. And the whole point of this book the whole point of the university in some aspects is to break and remake you, and that's what they say at the very beginning. And we really see this happen to the characters and to us as well. The book is part of the hypertext that it talks about, and I love that Sashka wants to retain her humanity throughout all of this, that she wants to, sure, build a new world, sure, be a part of this text, sure, do all the things the university wants her to do and her mom might want her to do, but she still wants to be human. And it's just such a unique process to make sense from nonsense that the book shows, and to see how it transforms all of the characters that we were so familiar with, that we thought, oh, well, they're still people, they're still just familiar creatures, and to see them morph into something different. And I don't know how the translator did at the end, because I never read it. Maybe it was so good that the beginning was worth it. I don't know. But I think that even with all these petty moments and drama and teenage angst, it's beautiful to see those human moments of Sashka along with the universal. Without these petty neighborly wars, without breaking the rules, without saying things that we shouldn't have said, are we even human? And I like that the book shows this attitude toward mistakes. Like, mistakes are punished, everybody wants to avoid mistakes, but people still commit mistakes, and well, life continues. They change as people, they suffer from it, but they learn from their mistakes. The only learning comes from the mistakes that they commit. I mean, this is a Bildungsroman as much as it is all of the other categories above. And I think that when people pick holes in the like philosophical aspects and the psychological aspects of this book, they are forgetting that originally this was meant for a young adult audience. It's not life-changing, it's not life-altering, but it's a worthwhile one if you're interested in fantasy or Bildungsroman. The title Vita Nostra comes from the Latin anthem Gaudeamus, which talks about, well, seizing the day and living while we're young, and how Vita Nostra brevis est, our life is brief, our life is short. Because our life is short, why not give it a shot? And of course the plot is pretty much non-existent throughout, and I think the translation suffers, even if I am in the minority holding this opinion. And yes, the characters aren't always well developed and the focus is on Sashka. And Sashka is far from the perfect character. I mean, she cries a lot, same. She kind of becomes a terrible person and she says things that she wants to take back. But who didn't commit these mistakes, especially during the difficult sort of teenage puberty? I really don't want to say anymore. I think I've talked long enough, because the magic is in finding out all of these things yourself. It really is an interesting take on fantasy, and out of all the Russian fantasy I've read, this is definitely amongst the strongest categories. So with that, I hope this brief overview of the book helped. If you read the book, please drop a comment. Try to keep it spoiler free for all the people who didn't read the book, because I didn't want to make a video where I just talk spoilers about the book, because then what would be the point of you reading the book? But I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.